In the quiet English town of Farnborough, during the bleak post-war years of the late 1940s, a strange and unsettling story unfolded. It began with an ordinary factory worker named Margaret Ellis, a woman whose life was about to become the center of a medical mystery that defies explanation to this day. This is the story of the woman who didn't sleep and the chilling questions her disappearance left behind. Margaret Ellis was a woman like many of her time. In her late 30s, she was described as hardworking and unassuming, a familiar face at the local factory where she worked. She lived a simple, unremarkable life. But in the spring of 1947, something changed. Margaret began telling her family and friends a startling claim. She hadn't slept a wink. Not for a day, not for a week, but for a full 30 days. At first, her claims were met with disbelief. How could anyone survive without sleep for so long? Yet Margaret insisted she wasn't just tired. She felt an unnatural, persistent wakefulness. She described it as if a switch in her brain had been flipped and simply wouldn't turn off. Her family, increasingly worried by her gaunt appearance and anxious state, knew she needed help. On April 28, 1947, Margaret Ellis was admitted to the Cambridge Military Hospital. The doctors at the hospital were skeptical. The human record for sleeplessness was a fraction of what she claimed. Their initial diagnosis was severe anxiety, a common affliction in the stressful post-war era. They expected that a few nights of rest in the quiet hospital ward would resolve her strange condition. But Margaret's first night under observation yielded a baffling result. She did not sleep. Nurses making their rounds found her awake at every check-in, her eyes wide open in the darkness, staring at the ceiling. As the days turned into a week, the medical staff grew more perplexed. They watched her constantly. Margaret would sit quietly in bed, sometimes reading, sometimes just staring into space, but never sleeping. The nurses reported she was a model patient, polite, cooperative, and lucid. She held coherent conversations and showed no signs of the delirium or psychosis that should accompany such extreme sleep deprivation. Yet the mystery deepened. To confirm their observations, the hospital decided to implement stricter monitoring. They moved her to a private room where a nurse was assigned to watch her throughout the entire night, every night. The rules were simple. The nurse was not to take her eyes off Margaret for a single moment. For several consecutive nights, the result was the same. The logbooks were filled with identical entries. Patient remains awake. No signs of sleep observed. Patient alert and responsive at all hours. The staff was stunned. They had witnessed the impossible. How was her body functioning? Where was she getting her energy? Frustration mounted as every medical textbook and every known principle of human biology told them what they were seeing shouldn't be happening. Margaret Ellis was a living paradox. As the second week of her hospital stay began, Margaret's behavior started to take a bizarre turn. She became increasingly agitated and paranoid. She would whisper to the nurses that unseen forces were trying to harm her, that there were currents in the room she could feel. She developed a strange fixation on a small, dark spot on the wall of her room, claiming it was a source of negative energy. Her lucidity began to fracture, replaced by moments of fear and confusion. The woman who had been clear-headed despite her sleeplessness was now descending into a state of psychological distress. Desperate to induce sleep, the doctors tried everything in their medical arsenal. They started with standard sedatives and barbiturates, powerful drugs that could knock out the most hardened insomniac. Margaret swallowed the pills, but they had no effect. They increased the dosage to levels that would be dangerous for an ordinary person. Still, she remained wide awake. They even resorted to a controversial and now outdated procedure, insulin coma therapy, a risky treatment that involved inducing a hypoglycemic coma. Even this failed to bring her the relief of sleep. It was as if her mind was a fortress, impenetrable to any form of induced rest. The failure of every treatment left the medical team at a complete loss. They had a patient who was defying a fundamental biological need, a patient whose mental state was deteriorating, and they were powerless to help. The case of Margaret Ellis was no longer just a medical curiosity. It was a crisis. Then, on the morning of May 17th, 1947, nearly 3 weeks after her admission, the unthinkable happened. The nurse on the dawn shift went to check on Margaret. The bed was empty. The window, which had been locked from the inside, was now wide open. Margaret Ellis was gone. A frantic search of the hospital and its grounds began immediately. Police were called in, and the surrounding woods and fields were combed. But they found nothing. No footprints, no torn clothing, no sign of a struggle. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. The disappearance triggered a media frenzy. Newspapers ran sensational headlines. The woman who never slept, phantom patient flees hospital, theories about her fate swirled. The most straightforward explanation was that she had suffered a complete psychotic break. In her paranoia, she may have believed she had to escape the hospital, climbed out the window and wandered off, eventually succumbing to the elements in an unknown location. Her body, lost to the wilderness, was simply never found. But other, more speculative theories emerged. Some wondered if her sleeplessness was not a symptom of anxiety, but the result of a rare, undiscovered neurological disorder, perhaps a severe form of what we now know as fatal familial insomnia, though her case presented unique features. Could this condition have driven her to an irrational act? And then there were the more fringe ideas, born from the sheer strangeness of the case. Had she been abducted? Her paranoia about unseen forces led some to whisper about secret government experiments. In the dawn of the Cold War, was it possible she was a target for some clandestine agency interested in the limits of human endurance? While there's no evidence for this, the utter lack of answers left room for such dramatic speculation. In the years that followed, the story of Margaret Ellis slowly faded from the headlines, but it never completely disappeared. It became a piece of local folklore, a ghost story whispered in the halls of the old hospital. Her family was left with no closure, forever haunted by the image of their loved one, lost to a mystery they could not comprehend. The medical community was left with a file thick with unanswered questions, a documented case that challenged the very foundations of their understanding of the human mind and body. The case of Margaret Ellis serves as a chilling reminder that there are still profound mysteries about human consciousness. Was she a victim of a rare disease, a psychological breakdown, or something else entirely? We will likely never know for sure. Her story endures as a testament to the unknown, a haunting narrative of a woman who stepped outside the bounds of normal human experience and walked into the shadows, never to return. What do you think happened to the woman who couldn't sleep? Let me know your theories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this story as fascinating as I did, be sure to subscribe for more journeys into the unknown.